Uh, I
I
like
like that
the
song. I don't care what anybody says. I dig that part of the movie too.
yeah, I
It
don't know.
makes me happy in a eighth grade sort of way.
I mean, it's a movie I actually would like to see remade. I'm not usually crazy about remakes, but someone could make a really good Boggy Creek movie. And I
Hmm.
like Boggy Creek. I just think
Yeah.
someone could, modern budget, big budget and or not even a big budget, but just, fine tune it a little. You could turn out something pretty cool. Probably not the exact same thing. That's the thing. Like in the
Right.
70s that worked. Today that would not
Yeah.
work.
It wouldn't work really.
No.
Because there's really, I mean, it's scattershot at best as
Yeah.
far as a movie goes.
Yep. Yeah.
I would try to be cast though, because I can say some of those lines pretty good. What kind of thing could pick up 200-pound hogs under each arm and walk off with them? So see, I've been,
Practicing.
yes,
You're
fine
ready.
tuning. Yes, sir.
By the way, the box is behind me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Kickstarter gear.
Ooh. I saw the keychain.
That's like the least exciting thing we have.
Keychain. Hey man, I got mine.
I
It's
bought my
coming.
I
It's
got the
coming.
keychain through discountmugs.com.
Only the best for our backers,
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Yeah. I'm really glad I took this live so I can tell everyone about that. Check them out. Discountmugs.com.
Yes.
Official sponsor. All right. You ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go. This is SasWhat, a podcast about Bigfoot. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Seth Breedlove. I'm joined, as always, by my friend, Mark Matsky.
Hello there from Southeast Ohio, Bigfoot's summer home.
Just summer now?
Just summer, yes. I think by now we've established he migrates south.
Yeah, definitely.
Florida is a snowbird, that
Yeah.
that
He
big
gets
guy.
angry though. I think we've discovered
Mm-hmm.
too that he moves down there and then he gets angry. So, um, tonight's show is going to be well. First of all, I got to address a couple things. One, um, apologies for missing the show over the Easter holiday. It had nothing to do with Mark. Believe me, Mark is always geared up to record. I think Mark would do a show every night if we could. Um,
Yes,
if we did a show every
quite
night, it would
possibly.
entirely be Mark talking. I'd be just like asleep.
At a certain point, I'd just grab books off the shelf and start reading them, like an audio book for people.
Definitely. And but we're into, for those that don't know, the Minerva Monster movie documentary that I directed, is into post production. So we are down to less. We're right at like a month, right? I mean, it's way less
Yeah.
than a month until we have to send this thing off. So getting everything wrapped up on this is proving to be uh, a task, but thankfully we should be done here in the next week, I think. So hopefully once that's done, the movie's sent off, SasWhat becomes my primary focus again. And as far as the movie goes, if you have been following along, the it's available for pre-order right now at grassmangear.com. So if you're interested in Minerva Monster, head over to Grassman Gear and you can pre-order. You can also pre-order T-shirts and posters and all that stuff. So, the other thing I wanted to mention is that during the month of May, we are declaring May Small Town Monsters Month. So Mark and I will be doing 4 or 5 episodes. I haven't even checked to see how many weeks we have, how many shows we actually will be putting out in May. So I'm going to do that right
At
now.
least 4, right?
Yeah, we're at actually it's 5.
Is
So
it
it
5?
is
All right.
5. So we're gonna be doing, yeah, I guess 5 episodes during May, Small Town Monsters episodes, and what that means is we're gonna do. I think as of right now, the tentative idea is to do the tentative plan is to do 2 episodes focused on the Minerva Monster, one on the production of the film and one on the Minerva Monster case. And I will hopefully be including some stuff that we might be cutting out of the movie. So a little bit of, like sound clips and stuff like that from interviews. And then the rest of the month will be focused on small town monster cases. So, your Old Orange Eyes, Momo type River Styx monster, that kind of thing, kind of like what we talked about on last week's episode, actually.
A little big head in there.
Big head might throw them in. Charles Mill Lake monster, probably toss some of those in. If what I wanted to do though is I would love to get some listener participation on these episodes. So if you have a monster in your town, or of a town near you that has a monster, and it might be one that isn't very well known, send a letter to saswhatmail@gmail.com and tell us about your small town monster, and we will read your letter on the show, on one of the shows that we're doing. And we would love to do that because that would be fun to kind of spotlight some lesser known creatures. Like, I know I'll probably talk a little bit about Minnie the Monster from Mineral City, Ohio, my favorite local legend. So that'll be all during the month of May. So month of May, Small Town Monsters Month, gearing up for the release of Minerva Monster on May 16th. And I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add about those episodes.
Well, I think also we'll be doing a little debrief of the Ohio Bigfoot Conference.
Oh, yeah.
Which we will be involved with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And,
I think we
maybe some mobile recording too. Who knows?
Definitely. I think we have to. So I'll probably, actually, since we have a cabin down there, I'll be bringing my mixer and everything. I'll probably bring it all down. Maybe we'll get some people back to the cabin one night and do some interviews on site. That would be a lot of fun, actually.
Yes, it would.
So let's plan. Yeah, May is going to be crazy. May is going to be a big month for SasWhat and Minerva Monster.
Wow.
And the two are not completely separated, and they will both be present pretty heavily at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference on May 16th. If you're there, SasWhat is actually a sponsor of the conference. So I'm fairly certain I'm allowed to say that because I'm pretty sure I saw it on the Facebook page at some point.
Yeah. It's on the website too. So
okay.
Secret's out.
Secret's out. SasWhat, official sponsor, Ohio Bigfoot Conference.
Wear your lime green shirt.
Yeah.
And represent the podcast, please.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So this episode is going to be somewhat themed, but it's also probably going to turn into a bit of a rant at times, or just talking randomly. We got a letter. Freestyling. Yep. Do you want to? I'll beatbox while you read this.
Should I rap the letter?
No, please don't.
Okay.
Don't.
I'll spare you.
We're way too white for that.
That's in the Mega Mix edition.
Yeah. Actually, I have heard you beatbox, so I'm well aware that you are skilled.
I have a few skills.
Skilled in the urban arts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. That was part of my undergrad, actually.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here is our letter. Hi, Mark and Seth. First off, great show, and I really enjoy the podcast and the work that you guys put into the show. Second, I'm not sure what the nerd level would be emailing a show about Sasquatch. I would insert there, certainly not more than actually doing a podcast about Sasquatch.
You're not at our level yet. You're almost there, though.
Anyhow, my thought/question/comments is, I listen or have listened to a variety of shows on this topic, including the show you mentioned in this podcast, Sasquatch Chronicles. In full disclosure, I'm a paid subscriber to that podcast. What struck me during your show and what I wanted to ask is, in your opinion, why do people make up or embellish sightings? I know that you have had shows on hoaxing, but I would put making up a sighting when nobody else is around in a different category. I don't mean to discredit Wes and that show. I think it is a fabulous show and probably will remain a subscriber for the time being. However, I don't participate in the Bigfoot community, so I'm not sure if there's a reason why people would want to embellish or make up a sighting. I'm wondering if this would give someone more legitimacy within the Bigfoot community. As a listener, it doesn't matter to me if someone has seen one or not. I would have listened to that show whether or not they had an encounter. I also find people who haven't had encounters to be just as interesting and credible as those who haven't. What I find most odd about someone making up a sighting and then broadcasting that sighting for the entire world to hear is a majority of people would probably feel ridiculed for telling their encounter. So I find it very strange that someone would be willing to make up a story about something that may or may not exist in the first place. I generally hold the belief that people are seeing something out there. I don't know if it is a Bigfoot or a known creature that is mistaken for Bigfoot. Obviously, this subject will attract some of the stranger people out there, such as Todd Standing, but I don't see the value in making up a Bigfoot sighting. Like I said, I'm not going to point a finger and say they made this up, and this was the first time I had heard about it. Anyhow, keep up the good work. Brandon.
Yeah, great letter, Brandon. Awesome letter, actually. And a couple of things I want to talk about. One of the things that jumped out to me while reading his letter was that word credible, and he's talking about it in a few different ways. But something I've noticed in the Bigfoot field is that there are people who will fake an encounter simply to appear more credible, or claim. I shouldn't say fake an encounter because obviously it's almost impossible, like, to completely 100% prove that someone is faking an encounter unless you have something like, I don't know, like a moon not being in the sky the night of their encounter. But did you just fall off the screen? No.
I almost, yeah,
Um,
somewhat.
so SasWhat? So what I find though is that people will suddenly someone is having multiple encounters with a creature that is supposedly extremely elusive for 99.9% of the rest of the general population. Suddenly you have someone who's just constantly seeing it, interacting with it, and all this. Um, it's that is something that is solely relegated to like these paranormal, quote unquote paranormal. I don't believe obviously Bigfoot's a paranormal field, but it's relegated to these kind of fields. Uh, it's the same thing with the UFO field. You have people who are constantly claiming to have interactions with beings from another galaxy. You have people that are claiming to see ghosts every time they're in a haunted house, and I don't know why you have to fake or why you have to claim you've had an encounter to gain some kind of credibility. Um, it's odd. I don't know if you have a take on that, Mark.
I think that the idea of wanting to gain a foothold in the quote unquote Bigfoot community, which we've talked a little bit about, talking about a sighting that you may or may not have had is one quick and easy way to sort of make a name for yourself. If that's something that you're interested in doing, I wouldn't say that there is a huge population of people who's looking to make a name for themselves in the Bigfoot community, but one way to do that would be to share an encounter that you've had. And when what we're kind of talking about here is hoaxing,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe the nature and the psychology of hoaxing. And it got me thinking as we're getting ready to record for tonight. When we're talking about hoaxing, really what we're talking about is lying.
Right. It's just lying.
It is. It is. And so the question then becomes, why do people lie? If you
Right.
want to think of it that way.
Right. It's funny. I wanted to get into just psychological reasons for hoaxing, so I was doing some research online today, and I
Mm-hmm.
came across an article on the Huffington Post by a guy, and this is totally unrelated to anything paranormal or Bigfoot. This guy had posted a photo of himself with a doctored lottery ticket, and he was basically trying to get people to share the photo, and then he was going to give them a cut of his lottery winnings, and he just did it to see what would happen, and it blew
Mm-hmm.
up and ended up getting like some obscene millions, literally millions of shares. And he was getting emails and letters from people telling him about their woes and why they wanted him to share the money with them and all this stuff. But for something that caught my attention is that at the very beginning of the article, he said it comes down to this: there are only two reasons for hoaxing. One is what? How exactly did he say it? One, basically, it comes down to attention or money. And what he said is instead of just those two, attention or money, he was talking about attention on, social media, people noticing you, taking notice of you. And when he was talking about money, he was actually talking about promoting things like promoting a work or something like that. But
Hmm.
I mean, really, what I'm narrowing it down to is those two things: attention or money. I actually think there's more to that. I think there's probably at least one or two more reasons besides just
Sure.
those two. But I do think you could probably make an argument that everything could be narrowed down just to those two things, and especially in the Bigfoot world. Um, I think a lot of times when people are claiming to have a sighting, money might be behind that. Or, obviously the things that spring to mind are guys like Dyer and the other guy. His name rhymes with Farty, Fascard, Fascard. Uh, uh, Obviously, that's all about money. And then you do have the attention seekers, the guys who want to show you their blurry photos of stumps, and so they can gain some kind of cult like following on social media. So I kind of liked that narrowing it down. I mean, I did think of other examples outside of those two. One would be like a mental illness because that's definitely something that takes place. People just lie for no. They might not.
Right.
People lie. I mean, without money or attention at the center of it, put driving them. They people still lie.
Sure.
So
Yeah. 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 I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why people lie. I mean, save face, avoid confrontation, to get your way, to be nice in certain situations. But I think you're right. I mean, as it hits this topic, you're really talking about two main things: attention being one, and financial gain being another. I do think, though, the example that you gave at the beginning about the guy who just wanted to see what happens,
mhm,
I think that may be behind some hoaxing.
definitely.
Just almost in a humorous vein. I mean, I think back not so long ago, I thought it would be a hilarious idea to, throw a hubcap in the air and snap a photo and say, "Hey, look, a UFO," And I wasn't trying to get any attention for that or sell pictures of it. I just thought it would be really funny, to take a picture of a hubcap and call it a flying saucer, and this was sort of at the height of the first X Files popularity.
Mhm.
So you can have sort of a random, let's see what happens type thing there too. Another angle that I found really pretty fascinating is when somebody hoaxes or lies in support of an ideal,
Hmm.
and they kind of start, they know it's a hoax and it's false, but over time, if you tell a lie enough, you may start to psychologically buy in that,
Definitely.
that this did really happen. And you almost need to say that it happened in order to advance your agenda so that it
Yeah.
no longer becomes, this is what happened to me. But regardless of whether this happened or not, it's advancing a certain ideology that I have. And
Yeah.
that's where it
If
really gets weird.
it would be fascinating to see how many people that claim to have sightings. And I'm not discounting every sighting or anything like that. I'm just saying I would find it fascinating to see how many people who 20 years ago claimed to have a sighting that might not have had a sighting, but they have bought into that sighting over time simply because, and I know what you're talking about is a little different, but I'm saying like literally psychologically buying into your lie because that is a,
Mhm.
people do that. That is a legitimate thing that takes place. So it would be really fascinating to see how many people have absolutely 100% believe in their mind that they saw a Bigfoot, even though they made it up 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Mark Twain had a quote that said, "It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled."
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little bit of that going on here too. A motivation to hoax also that I thought was worth mentioning is sort of that, um, how would you say it? It's sort of an anti-institutional feeling coming through the hoaxer. In other words,
Anarchist.
yeah, you've got these credentialed uh, professors and scholars and people who society tends to look up to, and somebody gets it in their head, that they want to stick it to the man or the system, and so they're going to create some type of hoax event that fools the experts, and then they can sit back and say, look, they're not so smart after all because they bought into this fantasy that I've created. And so they're able to do a couple things there. They feel better about themselves, feel superior to, other people who have legitimate expertise in a certain area of knowledge and kind of seem like they're above it all.
Yeah, but I love this idea though that sometimes it's just there's no motivation behind it. It's just something someone is doing. Um, when I was a kid, this is pulling back the curtain. When I was a kid, we used to call those 1-800 numbers, like any 1-800 number we could find in the phone book,
Hmm.
and you'd get some poor hapless person just doing their job answering the phone, and we would prank them. We'd hold a conversation with them for 20 minutes about whatever they were selling, and then
Uh-huh.
at the end, someone would make like this ridiculously loud farting noise, and we'd all burst out laughing and hang up. There was no motivation behind that
Right.
besides
Right.
we thought it was funny.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing else to it. We can try to say it's all down to money and attention, and especially in Bigfootery, that is true of. I mean, I find it hard to put a number on it, but I'd say like 85, 95%, something like that of the time. That's probably what it's down to. But there's also going to be that percentage of people. If we're talking about the YouTube videos, that's probably like 99% of those YouTube videos are just guys having fun. Like
Sure.
there's nothing, they're not out to maliciously hurt anyone necessarily or anything. They're just having fun. That's it.
Mhm. Right.
I'm not defending that necessarily, but at the same time, I don't think anyone is trying to maliciously take down the Bigfoot community when they make a fake YouTube video either.
Yeah, and it's a motive that we have to talk about because it's a real motive.
Right.
It's a real driving force, and yeah, I don't know really anything firsthand about Ray Wallace, but I get the sense in what I've read about Ray Wallace that that may have been a motivation of his too, is just goofing around.
Mhm.
We've had a rough day out here cutting down trees and so forth, and we're just going to make it a little more interesting.
Right.
People do that.
Yeah. Now, when we were talking about people who profit off of hoaxes, um, there's another distinction here between profiting off of a hoax and profiting off of something that is a blatantly obvious. Our next episode is about the Minnesota Iceman.
Hmm.
And in that same vein, the Minnesota Iceman seems to have been, to me anyway, it'll be interesting to talk to you about it, but it seems to have been just a carnival exhibit. And there's a difference between the Minnesota Iceman and the Georgia hoax, to me. Now we can get into that, and I think that would probably be a whole other
Hmm.
episode that would
Sure.
be equally, just as diverse to talk about and
Hmm.
just as open to discussion. Um, but to me, there's a difference between pulling a hoax on people, literally bald faced lying about something, gaining their try in an effort to gain funds or whatever, gain ridiculous amounts of money.
Hmm.
And when it's a bald faced lie, or selling a few tickets to a dead Bigfoot exhibit. Now, what's really cool there, not cool, but what's really really curious to watch is Dyer ride that line, because you start out
Hmm.
with the Georgia hoax, and then I kind of feel like with the Hank in a box thing, I kind of feel
Yeah.
like he started riding the Frank Hansen,
Hmm.
Barnum and Bailey kind of line when he got to that. So
Hmm.
what I guess that's the evolution of a hoaxer.
Yeah, maybe, maybe. Um, yeah, the thing that you were saying there is really right on, and I think that uh, like for example, I know that there was a case where somebody faked a footprint cast and did their very best work on that to make it look authentic and sent it off to Grover Krantz. And Grover Krantz, took some time inspecting it and pretty much declared that it was legitimate. It was a real Bigfoot cast. And I think there is a qualitative difference between someone doing that just to show that they were able to fool an expert and sort of the Frank Hansen uh, 35 cents to look into this icy coffin. And a lot of that has to do with context, really,
Mm-hmm.
which we'll get into, I'm sure. But the type of event that Hansen was, promoting versus somebody who is really, it's a just a different motive, I guess, and wanting to say, I got one over on the preeminent Bigfoot scientist of the day. And I without any context to say this at all, I wonder if Dr. Meldrum faces this. I haven't heard him talk about it, but I just wonder if people are peppering him, with fake stuff all the time just to see what he'll say.
I think anyone who actively investigates the subject deals with that because I know BFRO gets it. Anyone who has any kind of hotline or a research, quote unquote, research team deals with that. I know the NAWAC does. It's got to be a constant. Anyone that actively goes out and looks into sightings or anything. That's unfortunate because like people that look into this stuff and are serious about it, they're just giving they're giving of their time to something that they're into, and they're
Hmm.
they're out there actively trying to find a solution or an answer to the mystery. And they're a lot of the time they're dealing with fake phone calls and kids having
Hmm.
fun at their expense.
Yeah. And the thing that's frustrating too is that some people are really good liars,
Mm-hmm.
really good.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear it a lot, and I may have mentioned this before. Most people would like to think of themselves as good judges of character, but there are some really excellent liars out there who, through their passion and their ability to act, can really sell a story, and so that doesn't help.
Right.
We'd all like to be able to say that within 10 seconds I can tell if somebody's being truthful with me or not. But I think
Yeah.
anybody can get punked at a given time.
Never, never try to sell me on someone's story by telling me they've stuck to it for years. Like I never buy into something simply because the person that's telling the story has stuck to that same story for 30 or 40 years. It's that stuff doesn't matter. If it's funny because this is going to dovetail really well into the Minnesota Iceman story. There was an interview I was reading about Frank Hansen where it said, well, he pretty much took the story to the grave, right? So
Mhm.
it's gotta mean it was true. No, it's the same way I feel about the Patterson Gimlin film, and obviously I am more in the Patterson Gimlin film being real camp than I am in the skeptic camp. But just because Patterson took the story to his grave claiming that it was real all the way doesn't mean that it was real. That has very little to do with it. There's too much to lose, even in death, with a lie. A lie is a stain on your character. And you would rather go to the grave without people knowing one way or the other than you would admit to a lie.
Mhm.
I imagine it's hard to admit to something like as big as a story like the Iceman would be. Um, I imagine hard to admit to something like that all the way up until the minute you draw your last breath. If it was, and I'm not saying, again, like, I'm not saying that either of these things are fake. I'm just using them as an example.
Right. And it's quite possible as well to start out on that level of let's just see what happens and put something out there. And then it snowballs, takes on a life of its own. And even if you did step out of the shadows and say, hey, you know what, we faked this, you would have people who would probably turn around and
Come
try to
up with a
discredit you. Yeah.
Yeah, they come up with an elaborate conspiracy theory for why
Mhm.
you're saying it was fake.
Right.
Oh gosh,
Many rabbit holes here, I
there
think.
really are. Let's start to wrap this up though. There's other places you wanted to take this. What do you got?
Well, I think that the one thing that I really wanted to make sure that we talked about, and I kind of mentioned it already, I guess, is the idea of how this can be, something where you repeat the lie enough and you start to believe it, and at that point it becomes very difficult to separate fantasy from reality. Um, and it has a lot to do then with how you feel about yourself. And so I guess, I don't know, I guess we come full circle in a sense, that we've got sort of empty fame and a type of self-esteem, all falling under the umbrella of attention
Right.
as being one motive for hoaxing. And I guess included in that would be maybe a free pass into the acceptance in the Bigfoot community, such as it is. And then on the other end is the financial, what you stand to gain financially for hoaxing. But yeah, I've really racked my brain to think of people who have benefited in a huge way from a Bigfoot hoax. And I guess I'm at a loss to
Yeah.
find how that's like a lucrative gravy train,
What I
really.
actually what I found really cool about that quote about um, that I was quoting from the Huffington Post is that he
Hmm.
actually used the word promotion, and he was talking about promoting a product. And that got me to think. That got me to thinking about people that claim to have sightings and then go on and write books and make movies about the Bigfoots they've seen, or that just use the fact that they've seen a Bigfoot or multiple Bigfoots to promote themselves within the community as being some sort of expert. And those we definitely have. We definitely have people who are popular among a certain, a certain category of people who got popular through some sort of sighting they had or multiple sightings or in one case that I'm thinking of millions of sightings, um, including like telepathic and
Mm.
disturbing
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So
Well, and you know what? To the point of Brandon's letter,
mhm.
why? Because I think it is a real phenomena. Why would somebody be taken more seriously because they've had a sighting? He uses the word credibility. What makes it more credible that you've seen one than if you haven't seen one? Because a lot of who we would think of today as being some of the most credible researchers never had a sighting that they would, that
Yeah,
they've publicly admitted to. So that's an interesting little side trip as well.
that's
Is
another rabbit trail though. That takes me down the thought process that the people that are, because I see it all the time. I see people that say, "Well, you just don't spend enough time out in the woods, or you'd see them
right,
like I
right.
do." Well, John Green and Renee DeHenden and Peter Byrne and Grover. Did Grover ever see one?
I don't think so.
I
Not that
mean,
he. No. Mm-mm.
so if you're a bigger Bigfooter than those guys, then my hat's off to you, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
Wrap us up. Wrap us up on hoaxing.
All right. Well, like I said at the top, When we're talking about hoaxing, what we're really talking about is lying. And why do people lie? And on one level, I suppose you could take a spiritual worldview look at that and say there's reasons why people lie. Staying just in the psychological realm, people lie for a variety of reasons. Some are, I suppose, more benign than others, but the bottom line is people are not always truthful. And when you are in a field of endeavor, like trying to figure out if Bigfoot is real, and if so, what are the ramifications of that? You have to be conscious that people may not be telling you the truth. And it makes it hard to work for the truth because if you're not sure what you're getting is reliable, then how do you separate out the good points from the junk? It's hard. It makes this very difficult for people who, like Seth mentioned, are giving of their own time because they have a genuine interest in trying to solve this mystery. And unfortunately, at the heart of this mystery is also the mystery of the human heart, trying to figure out why we can't just be honest.
Leave it to the minister to take us home.
Preach it.
All right. All right. Let's do the Iceman.
Roll the Iceman.
Sounds like a dance. Let's do the Iceman.
Do the Iceman. You just lay there like with your hand. Throw your hand in the air. And lay there.
All right. Here we go.
All right.
This is SasWhat, a podcast about Bigfoot. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Seth Breedlove, and I'm joined tonight by my pal Mark Matsky.
Greetings from Southeast Ohio, the world capital of frozen Bigfoot.
And football.
And football, yes.
Tonight we're
Probably
talking
football first, if we were to do that the right way.
I mean, you have to, I think.
Order of importance.
Hilariously enough, I've only been to the Pro Football Hall of Fame one time. And
wow.
I mean, I lived maybe 3 blocks from it at one point for over a year. And obviously, I mean, I grew up 20 minutes away from it. So, yeah, I've been there one time. My grandma took me.
Did you do the thing where you threw the footballs through the little target things?
This was like decades ago. I mean, I can't even remember what I was. I just know that
back when it was one room.
Yeah. What I really wanted to do was go home and play with my Game Boy. That's what I remember.
Why are we here?
Yeah. What is this? Sports? Tonight we're talking about the Minnesota Iceman. You know what? I'm gonna let Mark explain what the Minnesota Iceman is because I think Mark has probably a much more substantial knowledge of this whole case than I do. But this was spurred on by a letter we got, and I actually forgot to mention this to you in the pre-show, Mark. I got to give some credit here to our letter writer.
Yeah, please do.
Which was, let me see, I have the letter right here. Nope, that's the wrong letter. Zach Moore suggested doing a letter on the Minnesota Iceman. Actually, I don't know. Did we read this letter on the show?
I don't think so.
I'm going to read it now just in case I didn't read it before. So Zach Moore wrote way back at the beginning of March, and I don't think we read it on the show. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. And he asked a question that I'm going to answer to. He says, I found your podcast via your guest spots on the Bigfoot Show and became an instant fan. I appreciate the frequency of episodes and the wide range of discussion topics. 2 questions for you. 1, I see your podcast feed only goes back to episode 20. Is there somewhere to listen to the episodes before that? That would be saswhat.podbean.com. They're also on the blog, which I haven't updated since like episode 30 something. So I need to go do that. That's saswhat.com. And I need to update that though. The deal with SasWhat on Podbean is apparently they only archive on iTunes through the most recent 20 episodes, which is a pain in the butt. And one thing I did not realize when I signed up with SasWhat or with Podbean, so I'm gonna need to try to figure out something there because if I was, I listen to everything in iTunes, so that would drive me crazy. So I'm going to try to find out if I can get a better hosting plan through them or something to get all those episodes archived in iTunes. But in the meantime, go to saswhat.podbean.com and all the archived shows are on there. You should be able to download them. But in the meantime, I'm terribly sorry about that though to anyone who listens through iTunes, which is probably a pretty decent amount of our listeners. I guess I never realized that until we hit like episode 40 and someone wrote me about it, and then I was like, oh look.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, question number 2: have you done an episode on the Minnesota Iceman? It's been one of my favorite stories in cryptozoology ever since I saw it featured on Unsolved Mysteries. I actually got to see it in person at the Museum of the Weird in Austin, Texas, about a year ago. As cool as it was to see this icon of cryptozoology up close and in person, I must say it looked a lot faker than I'd imagined. The head and torso were disproportionately large in relation to the rest of the body, and the face just looked off. Of course, I don't know if this was the original or the alleged copy, assuming there was more than one to begin with, but that's my input from my personal experience, and I'd love to hear your take on the whole Iceman thing. I cannot believe I didn't even realize that that letter had been sent in. So I'm glad I caught that so we could go back and catch that. We got another letter I don't think I ever read. What has happened to me? I'm going to read this one too, real quick.
Yeah, read it.
This one was back on March 7th. Craig Engelman wrote, let me make sure he doesn't ask me not to say his name. No. I hate running on treadmills to stay in shape during the winter, but I discovered your podcast and look forward to working out when I can listen to a couple of episodes of SasWhat. You mentioned on a recent episode the possibility of doing a show on the psychology of hoaxers. I think that's a great idea. I would love to hear about the methods used and why they were ferreted out as hoaxes. Keep it up. Love the show. Thanks, Craig in Texas. Craig, we just did that. Hopefully you enjoyed that show. And yeah, I'm just real quick looking back through our letters to make sure we didn't get something else I missed. We got a letter from Sean Brown inviting us to come bigfooting in the Smoky Mountains. I love the Smokies.
Yeah.
So I will do that someday. But yeah, thanks to both of those letter writers. And here's your Minnesota Iceman show, Zach. So, Mark, take it away. Tell us about the Iceman.
The Iceman is one of those stories that the more you dig in, the more confusing it becomes, and the more layers there are, and each question raises more questions. But the thing that I found intriguing is that the story really begins in 1967, and in many ways, there's parallels between the Iceman story and Patterson Gimlin. But as you're probably aware, we've come to a place in time now where the PG film is really regarded, I think, as, if not boilerplate, then pretty strong evidence, whereas the Iceman is not. And some of that has to do with context, and some of that has to do with the character of the people involved. What's really interesting is, when we get into it, is that, we'll see attached to the Iceman story is something that almost never happens, which is actual scientific peer-reviewed journal publication regarding the piece of evidence in question. And so that is, for me, sort of spilling the beans. That's sort of the fly in the ointment when you talk about the Iceman, because otherwise it would seem pretty cut and dried to me, Seth, that this is just tomfoolery to the nth degree. But we have the inconvenient character of Bernard Huvelman, who got to see that and gave his impressions of it. But it starts in '67 with a young man by the last name of Cullen, who evidently saw Frank Hansen displaying in a rather large coffin frozen in a block of ice, what appears to be a caveman, and that's sort of how it was billed at first, sort of a caveman or a missing link in places like state fairs and stock fairs and exhibitions. And Hansen was also displaying an old John Deere tractor that he had refurbished. And Cullen tried to get the attention of some mainstream anthropologists, and they really were not that interested for various reasons. Finally, he was able to get in contact with Ivan Sanderson and tell him about what was going on in this exhibition. And it just so happened that at that time, Bernard Heuvelman was a house guest of Ivan Sanderson. And so they were either invited or Sanderson prevailed upon Cullen to try and allow Hansen to, so they could come and see for themselves what was in this block of ice, which ended up happening. And they were invited to come to Minnesota to see the creature, who they, for whatever reason, Sanderson and Heuvelman termed Bozo. And they spent 3 days taking an in-depth look at what was behind the ice. Sanderson very famously sketched the figure that they saw, and that sketch has appeared in more Bigfoot books than you can shake a stick at, with the hand sort of thrown up over the head. And they gave a very, very detailed description of what they saw, including such details as a broken arm with protruding bones and one eyeball hanging out of its socket, the other eye missing altogether, the teeth, even genitalia were noticed and remarked upon. And Heuvelman and Sanderson both came to the conclusion fairly rapidly, I think it should be mentioned, that this was an authentic cadaver that they were looking at. And the thing that evidently sealed the deal for them is that Heuvelman got a lamp close to the glass case. And I don't know if there's a reaction of the heat against the cold, but some cracks developed in the glass that allowed some scent to come up through the glass. And it was a very pungent, putrescent odor that caused them both to think that what we're smelling is rotting flesh. Therefore, what we're dealing with here is a real live body of something. And so they worked very hard for those 3 days to try and document what exactly they were looking at. Following that experience, Frank Hansen, who allowed them to view Bozo in the ice, he was, for whatever reason at that time, he didn't want them to talk about what they had seen very much, allegedly. And he had some very interesting origin stories about where this body had come from. All of, and the basic idea being that the body encased in ice was purchased in Hong Kong by a millionaire owner, again with alleged ties to Hollywood, and I'll bring that up a little bit later, some speculation as to the identity of that person, but they wanted to remain anonymous. They leased out the body to Hansen so that he could exhibit it in various places, mostly in the Midwest, Minnesota, Illinois, your heartland states, to see what the reaction would be for the public to see this sort of missing link type, missing link evidence for. The idea being that the owner of the body, this millionaire with ties to Hollywood, was also a strong creationist, and without getting too much attention, wanted to see what average American would think about proof that perhaps evolution was real. And it's all gets very convoluted.
Hmm.
And that story would change over time, by the way, that Hansen would
Yep.
tell about it. But
Yeah.
by in the initial exposure, Hansen, this was pretty much his story. That he was doing this at the behest of a mysterious figure, and he didn't really want a lot of publicity. And what did Sanderson and Huvelman do? Well, they turned around and wrote articles about it and put it out there. And here, what I was talking about before is Huvelman actually was so impressed by what he saw that he wrote everything down and wrote out this study, and it was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal in Belgium. Which, today there's all this talk, of course, about DNA and journals and things, but this actually happened in, I believe, it was 1969. That may be off, but in that general time vicinity. And Sanderson, of course, was a master at working the media to get these stories out there. So that attracted the attention of John Napier of the Smithsonian, and he wanted to kind of send out some feelers. He sent somebody else really to make inquiries, I guess. And interestingly, it was an ornithologist. It was an interesting choice of a person to get involved. But then there's some questions as to the FBI becoming involved in the investigation as well, although officially those all end up being, when you read the footnotes and so forth, it says the FBI really wasn't interested that much. But that may have caused Hansen to adjust his story somewhat and adjust the actual figure that was in the ice, because as rapidly as consciousness grew about the Iceman, suddenly it was gone and it wasn't being displayed, and nobody knew what had happened to it. And it was only, I think, a year or so later that the Iceman resurfaced in the same sort of places, state fairs, shopping malls, and so forth. But it very quickly became apparent that this was not the original, or at least it seemed that it wasn't the original. At any rate, it was in a different position than the original had been. And there's, I guess, photographs that have been taken and comparisons made of at least 15 differences in posture between the figure as it was originally displayed and the second, that's sometimes referred to as the model or the copy. And what Hansen was pretty upfront about was that this was a model. This was a copy that was now being shown. That at first the story was the original owner didn't want to display it anymore for reasons all his own. And some people have suggested that Hansen, it gets really convoluted and conspiratorial, but that anything from Disney Productions had some hand in creating the copy or the model, all the way down to Hansen later on admitted that he himself shot the creature in the
Yeah.
North Woods.
Yeah. I want to
And
talk about that change
yeah,
because
yeah.
that the backstory of how he came into possession of this thing is wacky.
Hmm.
Um, so you said that there was a Hollywood connection here, and this is something I want to bring up because I find it to be one of the most fascinating parts of the story because I'm a big fan of those stories about the Yeti hand and Jimmy Stewart. And
Hmm.
again, we have a Jimmy Stewart connection here where some people tend to believe that the person who actually came into possession of this that handed it off uh, to Hansen would have been Jimmy Stewart, and the thinking there is that Jimmy Stewart was always traveling. He was obviously because of his connection with Tom Swift, who funded so many of the early expeditions to look for Yeti and Bigfoot. that it could have been somehow. Is there any thinking behind the Jimmy Stewart connection besides the fact that he traveled a lot and he was in Hollywood and he was a millionaire? Or is that
Well, those are very important points, and
right?
that's why the speculation tilts that way. But it's also the idea that Jimmy Stewart was, in fact, a pretty faithful Christian by all accounts, and held to a creationist perspective. And he wanted to see what Heartland America would think if a missing link was put in front of them. That's as the story goes.
Hmm.
That seems like a very strange way to test the waters. And
Hmm.
as fascinating as a story as the story is, it seems to me to be a very complicated way to gauge public opinion.
Yeah, and
You
then
know,
Hanson's story changes, and suddenly it was he shot it while on an expedition in where did he claim he shot it? It was in like Canada or something, wasn't it?
Canada or northern Wisconsin or
Okay.
somewhere north.
Okay.
And some of those stories put Cullen with him in the hunting party,
Hmm.
who is the man who alerted, Sanderson in the first place.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure what to make of that
This
either.
this story crops up every few years. I mean, it'll come out, it'll be big for a little while. There'll be some new piece of information that comes out. I remember last year it was big on Facebook because it had at that point become sort of part of this government conspiracy thinking. I'm not sure how. I don't know if you're aware of how it became part of that whole conspiracy idea. Do you have any Did you read any of that stuff? I didn't
Well,
read.
not so much that as really the personal ramifications for Hansen.
Okay.
Assuming that he really did shoot a creature, then the thinking goes he was afraid of what might happen to him, especially when he heard the FBI might be getting involved. And that's the motivation, according to this line of thinking, for him changing it from the original to a copy or a model,
So,
is that he sort of freaked out. But then some people have suggested that it's not a copy or model at all, that he could have conceivably let the body, let the ice thaw a little bit, reposition the thing, and then freeze it up again. Although I don't know how you do that really. It just makes me wonder, where do you do all this thawing and freezing and stuff? It's wild. It gets
I'm
really wild after a while.
on the surface. This is like the most obvious thing ever. You've got a carny showman who does is exhibiting this uh, showpiece basically to make some money. How does it even become something that's taken seriously? I guess when you introduce the Sanderson and Huevelmans or Huevel, Huevo, Huevos Rancheros. Uh, when you introduce Huevos Rancheros and Sanderson into it, then suddenly everything's different, I guess. But I still think just that alone, the fact that Sanderson was a showman, should be cause for a little bit more skepticism. And I'm sure I know there's a lot of different stories that are flying around about the origin of this thing, but it's all just speculation and stories. The only thing we really know is that this guy had an exhibit,
Hmm.
and Sanderson and Huevelman, Huvelman, how do you say it?
Hoovelman.
Huvelman, Huvelman.
Heuvelman. I have been known to say it, Heuvelman.
See, I say Huevelman. This is gonna drive me crazy. Those guys took it seriously. That's really
Yeah.
all we know.
Right.
There isn't this stuff about Jimmy Stewart and all the rest of it. It's just speculation and side story and he said she said stuff. It's none of it is categorical fact. We can't
Hmm.
I don't think there's any way. And even I was reading where his wife, his Hanson's wife was asked after his death, and she said he took it to the grave. They don't know. They never knew.
Hmm.
His son didn't know, and his wife never knew.
Right.
So,
Well, and was as it was mentioned in the letter, then this comes up again with the evidence sale of whatever it is in the ice to Austin's Museum of the Weird.
mhm.
And that made a splash, a minor splash in media circles. And it was reported that it was the original creature that was in the ice, which I found to be extremely strange,
Mhm.
um, especially because what appeared in photographs of that didn't seem to correspond very much at all to what we see in Sanderson's sketches and in actual photographs were obtained at that time, all of which leads to just absolutely muddy waters.
So
It's just it ends up being a mess because there is just more questions, question after question with this.
did you see? Okay, so am I wrong, or didn't you see this thing?
I almost saw it. I
Okay,
saw
I
the
thought you did.
outside of the display at a shopping mall in Saginaw, Michigan. This would have been in the early '80s, and I don't know. I just wasn't functioning that day, I guess, because I didn't go and look. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was making the rounds still at that point in time.
Yeah. Um, Physically, this thing apparently was more of a. Now, what I saw pictures of looked like a Bigfoot, but from what I was reading online, the original Iceman resembled a caveman. I mean,
Yes,
it wasn't necessarily a Bigfoot. So what am I seeing
right.
pictures of that looks like a Bigfoot?
Well, that's the question: is
Okay.
what is that?
Okay.
Because Huvelman was convinced that what he was looking at was a Neanderthal. Sanderson didn't agree with that, but you're right in thinking that the original thing um, tended much more towards caveman than it would Sasquatch. You look at the pictures of what's in the Museum of the Weird today, and it is very much sort of a like a reddish brown Bigfoot
Hmm.
figure. And so it makes your head spin after a while because it just really does not look like the what is reportedly the original.
Right. Right. So, wrap it up. Wrap us up with the Minnesota Iceman.
Huh. Well, the Minnesota Iceman is legendary, shall we say. It's one of
Americana.
those, yeah, it is. And, there's a certain era of Bigfoot literature that took that fairly seriously. I mean, it really did put that out there as evidence to be considered alongside of footprint tracks and the Patterson Gimlin film. And I think the more that the story has been allowed to sort of simmer, it's sort of been seen for what it is in context, which is to say, an exhibition, a series of shifting stories and pseudo conspiracies, which people love, fascinated by, and like to spend time, mulling over. And I really feel like it would be very easy to just slam the door on the coffin and say that this is sort of a P.T. Barnum 20th century writ large example of what people are willing to believe, except for good old Bernard and his his detailed eye and description of what he saw behind that ice, along with what he sensed, using his senses in gathering the information. And in the very same breath that I say that, you have to temper that with the realization that, this would be so earth shattering if it were true. And he might be thinking of this as a once in a lifetime experience to be able to examine this block of ice and the inhabitant within. And that perhaps, his enthusiasm got the better of him. Um, I mean, I'm not saying that he wasn't careful in his research. I'm sure he was. But I think, like that infamous poster hanging in Fox Mulder's office, he probably wanted to believe just as much as he was trying to rule things out and, have that skeptical scientific mind working. So if it were not for his involvement, I think we could pretty much write this up to a really good sort of late 20th century tall tale. But Huvelman's involvement with it leaves just enough room open to think, what really was in that ice during the first year or so that it was being exhibited.